Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 654. And today's date is April 29th, 2015. And the title of this episode is The U.S. Government Central Bankers Are Blaming the Economic Collapse on the Weather. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, out in Greece, we understand that Greece, basically, they're broke. And we see the people of Greece, they're getting nervous. They are now taking their money out of the banks. They've been doing this for quite a while. And the deposit outflows have reached around 2.5 billion euros in March, driven by the decline in retail, which is negative 2%. Public sector and others is around negative 5%. Between December and March, the Greek banks have lost about 27 billion in euros. This is a 16% decline. During this period, the stock of corporate deposits is down by 29%, retail is down by 13%, and other by 14%. Basically, people are protecting themselves. They're worried that they're going to be Cyprused, which means a bail-in, which means a bank holiday, which means capital controls, and they are taking their money out of the system. And they're keeping it until they see exactly what's going on. And it really does look like Greece is going to exit. I mean, they have everything in place, and there's a lot of talk around the talking head financial people, and we see that they're even admitting that, yeah, Greece might just exit. We also see that Greece has been talking to Russia. Russia's been putting out their hand saying, listen, we will help out, but you need to leave the euro, the eurozone. You gotta leave them. We'll lift the food embargo. We'll make more deals with you. We'll bail out the banks. We'll spur economic growth. We will not put you further into debt. And we can see they just might as well go ahead and turn and pivot towards Russia and the BRICS system. But again, we're going to have to wait to see and watch this very carefully. Now, here in the United States, we see the corporate media and the central banking system is continually telling us that everything is absolutely fine here. We're in a recovery, and the first quarter of this year, the GDP numbers, they're low, and it's all because of the weather. Q1 GDP was far worse than almost everyone had expected and tumbled from a 2.2% annualized growth at the end of 2014 to around 0.2%. This was well below the Wall Street consensus. They thought it was going to be up around 1%. The main reason for the plunge in economic growth was not only personal consumption, which was cut by more than 50% from last quarter, tumbling to about 1.3%, but fixed investment, which, subtracting the 0.4% from the bottom line GDP number, was the lowest print since 2009. The U.S. economy is a disaster, and we can see inventories have accumulated. Now, was the weather the real problem? If the weather actually caused the GDP numbers to decline, like they're telling us, why didn't everyone purchase online? Right? You're stuck in your home. It's a snowy day. It's freezing cold. We see all these stores telling us that they're closing their brick and mortar stores. Why? To concentrate on their online growth. Why didn't all the consumers turn to online sales? They didn't. Because the real reason is that people don't have the extra money to go out and purchase goods. They don't have the high-paying jobs. They're making a lot less money. And a lot of people are holding on to their money. A lot of people can't even make it through the month. Those college graduates coming out of college, They have student loans to pay off. They don't have extra money with their part-time jobs, living with their parents, to get a TV, to purchase other goods. And we can see once again, healthcare. You know, that mandatory spending on healthcare, that boosted the GDP up to a 0.2%. And we can see that inventories, there was about 121.9 billion increase in private, mostly non-farm inventories in the first quarter. This was the biggest inventory increase in history. If U.S. inventories, already at a record high levels, and with the inventory sales rising to great financial crisis levels, had not grown by this $121 billion and merely remained flat, the GDP would be about 0.2%. It wouldn't be this high. It would actually be at negative 2.6%. But now we have this huge buildup of inventory. It has to be cleared out. What are they going to do with it? And we can see there's been a 1.1 trillion in consistent inventory buildup in the past 3 years. Why? To pump up GDP. So now they need to unload this. But the consumers out there, they can't purchase. So the inventories are going to go nowhere. And what we're going to see with every passing quarter is the GDP is going to continually decline. But of course, the government, the central banking system, they're going to manipulate the numbers. They're going to try to boost it up with Obamacare. They'll manipulate and revise numbers back down. They'll do whatever they possibly can to keep these numbers alive. But at this point, we're looking at a complete disaster. The illusion is broken. The statistical numbers, the illusionary numbers the government continually puts out, is going the opposite way of what the real economic indicators are telling us. I mean, we look across the country and what do we see? Chemical manufacturing in the middle of the U.S. falling apart. Primary metal manufacturing. They're saying we continue to see a drastic slowdown in incoming orders from all sectors: energy, mining, agricultural, waterworks, general industrial. At a recent meeting with several foundries across the state, the trend continues to indicate a depressed state of business for industrial manufacturing. Fabricating metal manufacturing. Orders have fallen rather significantly, and the refinery turnaround is continually declining, and it will continually to slide throughout late fall, or maybe even early next year. It's going to be a very tough summer, they said. Things are getting ugly in all our locations in Texas and Oklahoma. Total business is down by 20% year to date, and we do not believe we have seen the bottom. The durable goods sectors just isn't very good. Impacted mightily by the price of oil, we are reducing headcount and spending where possible. Manufacturing here is falling apart. We have to remember, if people aren't going out with their extra money that they really don't have, and they're not purchasing goods, the manufacturers don't have to produce. If the manufacturers don't have to produce, guess what? Manufacturing suffers. They don't need the raw material. And this is why we see the Baltic Dry Index, which is a gauge of the raw material being shipped all over the world to manufacturers. It continually falls. It's dropped again to 595, down 6 points. Every time we see a 1 point bump up, a 2 point bump up, it's because of increased rates, increased insurance, the shrinking of the number of ships that are out there. But we can see that ships are not sailing around bringing the more raw materials. It's drying up at this point. Everything is falling apart. But the U.S. government, central bankers, they're continually trying to convince us this is the recovery, and this is what it looks like. So get used to it. This is not a recovery. This is a decline, an incremental decline over time to a collapse. This is what we've been following. And every time we report on this, we see it declining even more. Even if they try to bump it up and manipulate the numbers, we still see the decline. I mean, with real estate, they continually tell us that everything is fine. I mean, we saw the plunge in new home sales. Then we saw existing sales surge. And now we see pending home sales where people sign contracts and say, yes, we would love to purchase a home, and we're signing the contract. They don't know if they're approved yet for a mortgage. We don't know if they're going to back out. But we see pending home sales. It was bumped up a little bit. And all this little bump ups we're seeing is from the programs they introduced where people are coming in with no money down, 3% down. Doesn't matter if you have bad credit. We'll give you a mortgage. And we're seeing the other end of it where it's cash investors who don't need mortgages, investment companies, hedge funds who are purchasing these homes to keep the bubble continually inflating. But again, like I said, we see that people here in the U.S. can't find work. They're getting part-time jobs. They can't make their student loan payments because they only can find part-time work. U.S. home ownership is at its lowest since 1986, but they're telling us the real estate market is doing better. How can this possibly be? Someone is lying, and we know who it is. It's the government. We see mortgage applications, the Mortgage Bankers Association. They're telling us that the week ending April 24th, mortgage applications fell 2.3%. The refinancing and mortgage applications fell by 3.7%. If the Fed finally decides, which they're never going to do, they decide to increase interest rates, the entire system will implode in about 2 seconds. Maybe 1 second. This is why they keep pushing it off and continually push it off. Because they know if they raise interest rates, the whole thing is done. I mean, we're at these 0% interest rates for how long now? 7 years? They can't go anywhere with it. Of course, the Fed was out there saying, yes, the slowdown in the economy was because of the winter. Well, people could have purchased online. They didn't. Why not? This is the wave of the future, isn't it? Online sales. This is why Tiger Direct is closing their stores, because they want to concentrate on their online sales. Why aren't people purchasing? Why didn't we see a big news story? Online sales increased dramatically over this winter time period. We didn't. You know why? Because people don't have the money. Of course, Obama is out there. Same with the Fed. They're telling us it's the winter. And the story is kind of getting all intertwined in different agendas. I mean, Obama, in one hand, is telling us about global warming, that you people are the cause of why the earth is warming. And the economy didn't do well because of this very cold, stormy winter. So they have two agendas going on right now. They want to blame the economy on the weather because it's too cold, it's too snowy, people couldn't get out there, and then they want to turn around and tell everyone that you're to blame for global warming. And of course, they go from global warming, they change it to human cause global change, and we know this is completely fake, phony, and false. The government lies about everything, and you can see their agendas are getting all intertwined and intermixed, and they can't explain all of this away. We see Russia right now is looking at Cyprus, looking at Hungary, looking at Greece, and they are saying that they might lift the food embargo, and they're saying that we're not going to do this for every country. And we know that Greece, Hungary, Cyprus, I think, is going to have their food inspections a little bit later on, but they're having their food inspections. And we can see Russia has looked at it And we might see in the coming weeks where they say, hey, Greece just exited the Eurozone. We will now lift the food embargo for Greece. We did the inspections already. They're all ready to go. Cyprus is making deals and signing deals with Russia. Russia forgave a lot of their loans, lowered their interest to help the country out, to spur economic growth. And what are the private Western central bank countries doing? They are continually pushing more and more debt onto each and every one of the countries. This is what we are seeing. I mean, Russia and China right now, they signed and approved a deal that China is going to be receiving natural gas from Russia. And basically, this is going to be in the world's biggest pipeline. It's going to deliver about 38 billion cubic meters of natural gas. They're continually making deals with each other, with other countries. They're not bringing in their military. They're not forcing countries. They're saying, listen, we will rebuild your roads. We will build hospitals. We will help with your infrastructure. What we want to do is have a dialogue. We want to have a business transaction. And countries are going along with this. The United States government, central bankers, it used to be like this, but now the debt is so large. The system is crashing. The only way they can maintain this is to push military assets into each one of these countries or stage terrorism to convince them that the U.S. needs to be there. And they scare these countries into doing things they normally wouldn't do, just like they do with the people of the country. This is why they use false flags. It's the same thing. And right now we can see the American people, they're waking up. They're starting to realize that there's something wrong. They might not be able to put their finger on it. But Gallup did a survey. And the survey was, how do you see Obama? Is he honest and trustworthy? 51% of Americans do not believe the phrase honest and trustworthy applies to Obama. So they're starting to realize that he's not telling the truth. Well, the government hasn't been telling the truth for a very long time. They've been feeding us propaganda. They've been lying to us for their own personal, corporate, central banker agenda. This is what's happening right now. We see out in Baltimore, the riots, the protests. Right now, things are starting to calm down a little bit. There's about 3,000 National Guard members and police that enforce the curfew, and the curfew was set at 10 p.m., and there were helicopters flying around telling people to go into their homes or you will be arrested. And there were people that were still out there, about 200 or so, that were protesting who didn't want to go home. And like I said, when they do declare martial law, and I think it is when, they're waiting for the right situation. They're hoping that this is the situation. And we have to understand, most of the people will stay in their homes. They will obey. And then you'll have a group that will not obey. And I'm sure this group that was out there in Baltimore, a lot of them were agent provocateurs. We see that Baltimore schools, they're planning to open as long as everything stays quiet. They didn't want the children out there, which is completely understandable. But there are unanswered questions about the whole entire protest that was occurring in Baltimore. And this is coming from out of the Economic Collapse blog. Why are dozens of social media accounts that were linked to violence in Ferguson now trying to stir up violence in Baltimore? The data mining firm that found between 20 and 50 social media accounts in Baltimore linked to the violence in Ferguson. is now reporting a spike in message traffic in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, with protesters trying to get rides to Baltimore for Tuesday night. Now, why was that? Who was behind the aggressive social media campaign to organize the purge that would start at the mall at precisely 3 p.m.? Even though the authorities had credible intelligence, the gangs would be specifically targeting police officers on Monday. Why weren't they more prepared? On Tuesday, the captain of the Baltimore police tried to make us believe that they weren't prepared because they were only anticipating confrontation with high schoolers. Where were the Baltimore police on Monday afternoon when the riots exploded? Why are the police officers in Baltimore claiming that they were instructed to stand down? Why were so many police vehicles conveniently parked along the street where the violence happened? Why is organizations funded by George Soros stirring up emotions against the police in Baltimore? Why is CNN bringing on commentators that are promoting violence? Why did Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake initially tell reporters, yeah, whoever wants to destroy, go ahead, do that? Does the fact that the mayor of Baltimore has very close ties to Obama administration have anything to do with how events unfolded during the riots? The mayor was one of the 3 mayors who provided broad input into President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, which advocates the federalization of police departments across the country by forcing them to adhere to stricter federal requirements when they receive funding. Now, these are good questions, and we have to understand something is being done in Baltimore to gin this up. Now, what was being done in Baltimore to increase the likelihood that the protesters would riot? Well, we have to look at some of the teachers that have been reporting on what is going on. And I'm talking about the teachers in the Baltimore school district. When school was let out that afternoon, police were in the area and they were equipped with full riot gear, ready to go. According to eyewitnesses in the neighborhood, the police were stopping buses and forcing riders, including many students who were trying to get home, to disembark. Cops shut down the local subway stop. They also blockaded roads near the mall and near the Frederick Douglass High School, which is across the street from the mall, and essentially corralled all the young people in this area. That is, they did not allow the after-school crowd to disperse. They didn't let them go home. Megan Harris, a teacher at a nearby school, described what happened. Police were forcing buses to stop and unload all their passengers. Then the Frederick Douglass High School students in huge herds were trying to leave on various buses but couldn't catch any because they were all shut down. No kids were yet around except about 20 who looked like they were waiting for police to do something. The cops, on the other hand, were in full riot gear, marching toward any small social clique of students. It looked as if there were hundreds of cops. The kids were standing around in groups of 3 to 4, Harris said. They weren't doing anything, no rock throwing, nothing. The cops started marching towards the group of kids. They need those buses, they need the subway to get home. Otherwise, they're stranded. So basically, the kids were stuck. Meg Gibson, another Baltimore teacher, the riot police were already at the bus stop on the other side of the mall, turning buses that transport the students away, not allowing students to board. They were waiting for the kids. They had special instructions to gin this up. This was planned. Period. I mean, we can see from what is going on here, from all those questions, and the police cruisers just left in a certain area, kids being corralled in a certain area, not allowed to go home, shutting down all transportation. this whole thing was ginned up. They want this to spread across the country. Of course, President Obama finally came out and he spoke at last about this situation in Baltimore. Now, instead of telling the protesters to go home, let's have peace, and we should all march peacefully, we shouldn't throw things, we shouldn't cause riots, what he said was something completely different. And he said, we have seen too many instances of what happens to the police officers interacting with individuals, primarily African Americans, often poor in ways that raise troubling questions. And it comes up, it seems like once a week now, on every couple of weeks. And so I think it's understandable that, and more importantly, moms and dads across the country saying this, we're in a crisis. Obama also went on to say the situation in Baltimore is indicative of slow-rolling crisis that's been going on a long time, only coming to light because of social media campaigns and alert observers with cameras who shed light on police behavior. So the police are to blame for this. Now think about what he's saying right now and why he went down this path. He wants to create a race riot. This is why he's speaking like this. It sounds like, oh yeah, I get it, but he's completely blaming it on the police, so more people will take to the streets. He wants this to happen. He could have just said, listen, everyone, let's just calm down. Everyone, we need to go home. We need to do this peacefully. No one is to blame as of yet. We haven't looked at the entire situation. And we need to have peaceful marches. The protests in Baltimore started out peacefully. Nobody was doing anything until the situation was created and there were some outside forces that were brought in to help gin up what it turned out to be. And we can see right now the corporate media, the U.S. government have been pushing this. I mean, they're pushing this very hard. They're even saying that the Islamic State is now taking advantage of the racial tensions in the U.S. by attempting to recruit those Muslims among the American black population who are dissatisfied with the U.S. I mean, they're pulling out all the stops right now, trying to create an instance of protest riots across the country because we know what they're trying to do. They're pushing their agenda. Now, does this mean it's going to happen? Am I saying, yes, it's absolutely going to happen? No. But we can see that it is spreading. In Ferguson, people were protesting and 2 people were shot. I think it was just yesterday. In Oakland, California, and other areas, there are planned protests once again. And like I say, we have to look at the indicators and see if all of a sudden people just start throwing things, breaking things, destroying businesses. And we have to look closer to see, are these agent provocateurs doing this? Where it was a peaceful protest and they came out of nowhere and it just all started. Because if we see this across the country, this is what they're trying to do. And this is what we're looking for. This is what we need to film. This is what we need to point out and say, we know what you're doing. And we have to call them out on it every single time. Now, out in the Pacific, we know the United States government, the central bankers, along with Japan, they're trying to provoke China. China knows this. Russia knows this. North Korea knows this. Iran knows this. Syria knows this. They know what the U.S. government central bankers are up to. They can see it, they understand it, and they understand they're provoking them. And we can see they're continually pushing every single day. China now has come out against Japan's intention to patrol the South China Sea, saying that the United States has to stop sending wrong signals on the disputed area. The new moves by the U.S. and Japan were condemned as a plan to make Japan world auxiliary police as a way for it to meddle in global affairs and to provoke China. This is what they're trying to do. When I say they, it's the United States government central bankers. They want another country to start something. They want war. Why? To cover up this economic collapse. They do not want to be blamed for what is coming. I mean, you can just blame the weather for so long. And remember, the weather doesn't occur in all areas of the world throughout Europe and the United States. There are places where the weather is pleasant and nice. And guess what? The economy is still failing. And now we're moving into the spring and summer, and they cannot use the weather. And they understand this. And this is why they're trying to provoke tensions in the Asian Pacific, in Eastern Europe with Russia, the Middle East, Africa, South America, wherever they can get a fight. This is where they're going to push. It doesn't matter who it is. The players are always the same. China, Russia, North Korea, Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela, Iran, Syria, and many other countries. They don't care. They need to cover up what is coming. Now, of course, the U.S. Department of State spokesman Jeff Rothke, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, has alleged that Russian military has deployed additional air defense systems into eastern Ukraine and moved several of these nearer the front lines. He has no photos. He has no satellite imagery. He has no information whatsoever. And Russia is out there. Their defense ministry has completely dismissed that statement, saying we have absolutely no anti-aircraft weapons in eastern Ukraine. And if we do, please prove it. If you're going to say something, please prove it with a satellite image. Don't give us an image from 1970 that's black and white, blurry, with Photoshop drawings all over it. Don't give us a photograph of a tank, a Buk missile system that we can debunk in 2 minutes and search the internet for that photo that goes back, 2-3 years. Don't give us that type of proof, because it's not proof. It's propaganda. Give us real hard evidence. A satellite image, that high-powered HD, three-dimensional, colorful satellite imagery of the troops, of the tanks, of the anti-aircraft system. That would be fantastic. And if you can't do this, stop. We don't need the propaganda anymore. And that's all the government does, is continually put out propaganda. Now, on April 7th, we reported that Ukraine State Security Service, SBU, they took down 30,000 websites. They commandeered the servers. They took down the sites. And the reason for this is they were trying to block 5 pro-Russian ones. And they took down all of these sites because it was on the server, and they just decided to shut them all down. And we can see right now they want to censor whoever they possibly can. They only want their propaganda out there. They don't want anything else happening. They're actually blocking reporters coming into certain areas. They're harassing the OSCE. And we can see right now the far-right Ukrainian nationalist political movement, the right sector, is going to picket near the building of Poroshenko. It seems like they're having a falling out right now, where the government and the right sector are not on the same track anymore. Right sector informs that according to reliable information, the authorities are preparing a large-scale provocation against volunteer units. The protest comes shortly after paratroopers from the Ukrainian armed forces tried to disarm volunteer units. Military Chief Yarosh said that the country's military and political leadership has decided to deliberately provoke a conflict between nationalists and the army in order to discredit the volunteer units. They want these right-wing Ukrainian nationalists intertwined into the Ukraine armed forces or the National Guard. And it seems that they do not want to do this. So we're starting to see a rift in the country here, and we're going to have to watch that case very, very carefully. Now, shelling is continuing in the Donetsk area. It looks like they were shelling. They hit a high-pressure gas pipeline. It exploded in the Donetsk area, and there are still reports coming out of the Donetsk area, and they are saying they're gathering more intelligence, and they're receiving more intelligence that, yeah, something big is coming. They're planning, I should say Ukraine is planning a large-scale provocation on either May 8th or May 9th, including shelling of populated localities from heavy artillery systems. Ukrainian military buildup along the contact line has increased, and we can see that they're reinforcing all their military assets with Grad multiple rocket launchers, and it looks like they are definitely getting ready to do something very, very big, and we're going to have to watch this. Now, these dates might just go by and nothing happens, and it might occur maybe a couple days later, or it might happen directly on one of these days, and we're going to have to watch and see how this turns out. CNN, as we know, was completely off the air in Russia, and it seems like they are now back on in Russia, feeding the Russian population propaganda. The difference in Russia, you have to pay to see CNN, so CNN News is only to paying TV subscribers. Now, the Russian threat, according to NATO, is getting larger and larger, and NATO right now is doubling the size of its military in Europe as part of the U.S. geopolitical plan to complete a military circle around Russia. And we are seeing this in Eastern Europe, and we are seeing this in the Pacific. Obama was out there saying that we have China contained. Ashton Carter is making the tour around the Pacific, making deals with all these countries, bringing in more weapons, more missiles, more ships, more troops. We see in Japan they're moving from a pacifist to more of an aggressive society. They're bringing in more sophisticated weapons. We see the bases along Australia moving up from Guam to the Philippines, completely encircling China. We also see this in Europe, where they have the missile shield, military assets, troops all along the Baltic states, completely encircling Russia. They are containing these two superpowers because they understand when the time is right, war will be started with these countries, and they want everything pre-positioned. Now, out in the Middle East, the situation is getting worse as every day passes. The Houthis are continually fighting back. Nothing has changed with the bombing. And we can see this is spreading into Libya. Egypt is saying they're mounting an offensive, which should be coming very, very soon. The people of Libya are selling the oil. And guess what? The central bankers cannot have this. They're not using the dollar, so they need to get into Libya. The United States cannot do this. They're going to have to depend on the coalition forces unless there is some event that allows the authorization for war to be passed. But so far, we have not seen this. Does this mean it's not going to happen? No, I think they're building up to this. And if the coalition forces cannot handle in restoring the puppet governments of these countries, this is when we see the big thing occur. We see the Houthis in Yemen. And it seems like all the people in these countries always seem to go to the central banks and take the money. The Houthi militants are reported to have broken into the headquarters of the Central Bank of Yemen, and they stole about $107 million. Why? To fund their operations against the invaders, the Saudis, the U.S. government, and other coalition forces. We see the Houthis have taken control of the Yemen Air Force back on March 25th. And what's very interesting, when they took control of the Air Force in Yemen, this is when we saw Saudi Arabia start to bomb Yemen. Of course, the United States is orchestrating all of this. Now, out in Syria, we see Syria now has made a deal with Russia to fight terrorism, and they are getting together with Iran at this point in time. And Iran is out there saying they will not allow anyone to affect or target Syria's security, stability, and territorial integrity. Iran backs the Syrian government efforts in combating terrorism and running the inter-Syrian national dialogue away from foreign intervention. They both agree to fight terrorism because they understand what is happening in Syria and what is happening in Iraq. The Islamic State is a proxy army for the U.S. government, Israel, UK, and other countries. They are using them to create chaos in Iraq, and they are using them to capture more and more land inside Syria. The United States and the coalition forces are the air force to the Islamic State. And since we have been bombing, I should say the U.S. government has been bombing Syria, the Islamic State territory has tripled. The new recruits that they were training to fight the Islamic State didn't attack the Islamic State. They attacked the Syrian armed forces. They are pushing towards Damascus. We can see what's happening. The Iranians can see what's happening. Syria sees what's happening. And Russia sees what's happening. All of this is going to lead to World War III, because we have to remember, going all the way back when Wesley Clark had the list of countries, Syria and Iran were the last two countries to get into. But since that time, it was supposed to be done by 2008. It is now 2015. They have lost control of the Middle East. So there's a bigger problem right now. And the only way out is to go forward and try to get the governments of Syria and Iran, either by force or by making deals. It doesn't matter to them. It seems with Syria, it's by force. With Iran, they're trying the P5+1 talks, and we know this has nothing to do about nuclear weapons. This has to do with getting into the central bank and selling their natural resources using the dollar to prop up the system. Meanwhile, while that's all happening, the other countries are completely falling apart. So I don't think their plan is working out, and I think they're going to lean towards pushing the war very soon, because there's a lot of talk of something happening this fall in 2015. Is it going to happen? There's no crystal ball to say, yes, this is going to happen, but we have Greece. We have what's going on in the Middle East. We have the United States government, central bankers provoking China in the Pacific. We understand there's more bases. The 60% of the fleet is going to be out in that area. We see NATO building up, the U.S. building up to counter Russia. And we see the economy is completely falling apart and cannot be sustained. Their lies, their propaganda, it's all falling apart. But the question is, what happens the day after the crash? What will happen here in the U.S.? And this is coming out of the Daily Sheeple, where they put together some scenarios about the currency and what could happen here. And we know that the dollar, once all these countries decide not to use it and it starts to devalue, it's going to be very tough to purchase groceries. How would the currency devalue? Well, if the people, or I should say when the people of these countries take back their countries and they sell their oil not using the dollar, the other countries around the world don't have to keep dollars in the reserves. And since they don't have to keep the dollars in reserves, they will send them back to the United States. As more dollars come back to the United States, we have a lot of dollars in circulation. That means the value of the dollar goes down. Prices of goods go up. They don't really go up. It's the devaluation of the dollar that makes it look like they're actually increasing, because it takes more dollars to buy the same product. And this is what we're going to see. And a lot of people are going to have a very tough time, because just going for groceries, a tank of gas, or anything is going to become more and more expensive. So when this occurs, the U.S. could be prepared ahead of time, and they might say, you know something, forget the dollar right now. Let's get rid of the cash. We're going to go to an electronic currency. And this is why we hear rumblings about a cashless society. Do not keep cash in your safety deposit box. Cash is the devil. Cash is being used by criminals. And we can see they are pushing this because they might be headed towards this new electronic currency. Now, will this make things better? No. What will it do? Well, it will allow the U.S. government to blame a paper currency for the crash in order to distract the public from recognizing that the government itself is the problem. The central bank is the problem. It will allow the U.S. government to create a currency system that disallows the holding of tradable currencies by the population. That is, a debit card would be created by banks through which all transactions must pass, assuring that all transactions are processed by the bank. It will allow the U.S. government to have knowledge of every penny earned and spent by any individual or organization, allowing for direct debit income taxation. If the U.S. does institute such a system, U.S. citizens will then become the most economically controlled people in the world. It is likely that a black market system would maybe spontaneously be created by U.S. citizens in order to bypass the new government system. So we can see that this system might be all ready to go to, again, redirect everyone's eyes off of who created this collapse. And of course, they don't want to be blamed for this, so they're going to blame this on another country, another group, and say that cash was the problem. And if we didn't have cash, we wouldn't have these problems. If Russia didn't cyber attack us, we wouldn't have these problems. If the Islamic State didn't blow up our cities, we wouldn't have these problems. They're going to blame everybody else except for themselves. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.